I first saw Immanuel Kant in 1992, during my first visit to Kaliningrad, a short time after the Soviet Union had come to an end. It was, alas, not the great man himself that I saw, but his tomb and his grave, a miraculous survival after conflict, destruction and rebuilding, an evocation of the past alongside what was then the ruined cathedral and other reminders of the city's fractured history. Obviously much had changed in the philosopher's home city since his death in 1804. Even the name is different. For Kant, from his birth in 1724, for the whole of his life, had lived in Königsberg, not in Kaliningrad. That first day, now almost 30 years ago, I walked from the Kaliningrad Hotel past the shattered medieval cathedral, once one of the largest brick buildings in Europe, to the pillars of Kant's mausoleum, a survival of Königsberg. The philosopher seemed to have reached beyond the grave to ensure its protection from Soviet rebuilding. The historic city centre had been wrecked by British bombing in 1944. A new Kaliningrad after the war was built on the ruins of Königsberg. Enveloped by the post-war Soviet city, the new Kaliningrad, the tomb has become a gathering place for citizens of the Soviet Kaliningrad and then now the Russian Kaliningrad since the end of the Soviet Union. Newly married couples are often photographed there. They go there to celebrate, to commemorate perhaps what they think of as the greatest day in their lives. For Kant had reached east. It is Kant who brings them to his tomb. Lenin admired Kant, and the Critique of Pure Reason was a set text in Soviet universities. It said that respect for the philosopher's tomb, which one sees today, had even prevented the complete demolition of the adjoining cathedral, which was very seriously discussed by the Soviet authorities. The cathedral has now been rebuilt in the new Russia that emerged after 1991. Although Kant died in 1804, the present tomb wasn't built until 1924, designed by the German architect Friedrich Lars. Kant originally had been buried inside the cathedral. Then, in the 1880s, he was moved to a chapel which fell into a bad state, his reburial taking place in 1924, only 6 years after Germany's defeat in the First World War. The 1924 ceremony brought the certainty of earlier German cultural and philosophical achievement back through the fog of contemporary humiliation and doubt. In addition to being a citizen of Königsberg, the old capital of East Prussia, Kant was also briefly, from 1758 to 1762, a citizen of Imperial Russia, when Königsberg had been taken by the Russians in the war with Prussia and had become a part of Russia. His lectures, Kant's lectures during those years, were attended by officers from the Russian army, occupiers of the city. These lectures took place at the university that had been founded in the 16th century by the Prussian Duke Albrecht from the Hohenzollern family that eventually became the emperors of Germany after 1871. Although he was offered jobs in other universities, in other German universities such as Jena, Kant never left Königsberg, dedicating himself there to work and to teaching, yet showing sociability and an international interest in his table companions, who included the British merchants Joseph Green and Robert Motherby. That neoclassical monument that I saw in 1992, the first time I saw it, the grave of one of Europe's or the world's greatest philosophers, symbolizes intellectual immortality. For Immanuel Kant crosses frontiers as he crosses centuries. I saw this when standing there some 20 years later with a professor from Tokyo who wept to see the burial place of his hero. Nietzsche, the great romantic, declared that Kant's moral philosophy was pale, northern, Königsbergian, in other words, cold. But how can you say that things that emerge from this great, now partially defunct city, this city that has gone into history, how can you possibly say that they were cold when the philosophers who came from there included not only Kant but two of his pupils, each a great philosopher in his own way, Herder and Hamann? Did Kant not say that you had only to look into the eye of a swallow to see heaven? Does this not mean that there was a mystical dimension to him? His most famous work is the Critique of Pure Reason, a cautioning against complete acceptance of what one might think of the cold Enlightenment or French determinism. With his emphasis on the will, Kant points to 19th century Romanticism, to the revolution that was later followed by philosophers like Nietzsche. I've often met Kant on my journeys across the Eastern Baltic. The Critique of Pure Reason was first published in Riga, then part of Imperial Russia. The philosopher's brother was a pastor in Kurland, now part of Latvia, and there are Kant manuscripts and a cast of his desk mask with the top of the head cut off as if someone has scooped out the great brain in the Estonian University of Tartu. Tartu is near Lake Peipus and the Russian frontier, where in 1242 Alexander Nevsky's forces defeated the Teutonic crusading knights at the Great Battle on the Ice, stopping Western Christianity's march east. Kant, however, shows the spread of German culture east into the Baltic lands. For years, swathes of these were dominated by the descendants of Baltic German settlers who came after the Northern Crusades. They brought German culture, German literature, German religion, the religion first of all of the old Roman Catholicism, and then after the Reformation, the new Protestantism or the new Lutheranism. They controlled the indigenous people, the Estonians and the Latvians, to a certain extent the Lithuanians, although Lithuania was much closer to Poland. They controlled these in the same way that the English and Scottish settlers did in Ireland. Kantian ethics include the concept of duty, the power of will, and the value of the individual. Although he disliked organized religion, Kant thought that without God we should be condemned to despair. Kant's God needed no churches, though, or prayer, or even intellectual definition. He thought that certain concepts, such as the idea of God, were beyond human understanding. He had faith in moral equality. He disliked colonialism or conquest. You should judge each action that you take, Kant thought, in terms of a universal moral law. How would it be if what you did was applied to everyone? He welcomed the Enlightenment, yet thought reason had its limitations, which paradoxically only reason could define. Reason, however, he thought, was limited by its grounding in human experience. Kant welcomed the French Revolution. Its terror, he thought, showed how progress could come through strife and individual suffering. Is this cold, or is it simply realistic? It's certainly chilling, particularly after the horrors of the 20th century. As a citizen of the world, Kant reached beyond nationalism to peace. He was, however, undoubtedly Prussian, the fourth of 9 children of a poor harness maker, from a background of pietism, an offshoot of Lutheranism that disliked worldly clerics, put emphasis on individual conscience, on work, on duty and on prayer, and was important for the spread of education in 17th century Germany. A religion of the heart was what the pietists sought. Their creed might not have greatly influenced Kant or his intellectual development, for he disliked their pride in being of the elect. He thought it was conceited, and the inflexibility of the pietist education that he'd endured as a boy. But the virtue of duty, a pietist concept, is central to his thought. Kant looked out from Königsberg, although he never left it. His friends, as I've said, included Motherby and Green. He admired the Scottish philosopher David Hume and the English poet Alexander Pope, and he knew the work of the French philosophes and their relentless rationalism. When Kant died in 1804, the Romantic movement was beginning to make a new intellectual landscape. Yet people queued to see his corpse, its burial having to wait for the softening of the frozen East Prussian winter soil. On the grave today are the philosopher's own words. 2 things fill the mind with ever new and increasing admiration and awe, the more often and steadily we reflect upon them. The starry heavens above me and the moral law within me. They're inscribed appropriately enough in Kaliningrad in 2 languages, in German and in Russian, reflecting the city's changing identity from Königsberg to Kaliningrad. Although Königsberg has become Kaliningrad, Kant reaches across nationality to universal wisdom.